his example of concealed carry holders is absurd to me. This is my community. These are my people. I see them and I work with them very closely, and I have never seen somebody treat a firearm who is a concealed carry holder with such disregard.
Senator Metz.
Yeah, can I ask a question? Have you been in the military and been under fire?
I have not. I am law enforcement, so I do understand high stress. Thank you. Okay, so the red flag bill violates more constitutional rights than Charlie Sheen violates 10 commandments. That needs to be thrown away as it sits, or rewritten to protect constitutional rights. If you're willing to violate multiple constitutional rights for an illusion of safety, we have a serious problem in this legislation. There was talk about having the age to purchase a long gun moved to 21. That's a dangerously slippery slope, because what you are doing in turn is saying that Rhode Island residents are no longer considered adults until they are 21. If I cannot practice my fundamental Second Amendment rights when I'm 18 years old because I am not considered an adult, how can I be responsible enough to vote? Are you ready to battle that case? The politicizing of a terrible tragedy is extremely unbecoming. When it is said that Rhode Islanders can do better than this is where I agree. Rhode Islanders can do better than a knee-jerk reaction and emotional law trying to be passed. Politics or a political agenda are not more important than our children's lives. All the gun legislation that was put forth is a cop-out, knee-jerk reaction founded upon misleading or flat-out false data. This legislation and lack of proper action being taken is a major disservice to our children. We are not looking at the actual facts here. What we are actually doing is looking for the simplest solution, and I'm using quotes here, the simplest solution to a very, very complex problem. And the complex problem is a societal problem, and we have a very broken culture. What happens is we have become a culture that glorifies evil. We've glorified drugs, we've glorified gangs, we've glorified broken homes. And the result is evil, which cannot be legislated. So as I've heard a lot of talk from the 1994 to 2014 ban, you've heard all the statistics. What I'd like to just bring to your attention is a study done by UPenn. While gun violence did fall during the ban, it is likely due to other factors, this study found. Quote, "We cannot clearly credit the ban with any of the nation's recent drop in gun violence, and indeed there has been discernible reduction in lethality and extent of injury of gun violence." So, based on this study, the idea that the assault weapons ban worked is false. And I'll close with this. I hate to compare the state of Rhode Island to the state of Florida. I like to think that we are a lot better than them. Where we rank across the board, as far as the gun community, as far as the Second Amendment is concerned, we have some of the very strictest gun laws, and we are a very safe community. However, in Florida, what we saw was the single biggest failure of our government in modern history. I'll say that again, the single biggest failure of government in modern history. This is the very same government that wants sole responsibility for my safety and my security, for your safety, for your security. This government continually drops the ball. This FBI continuously drops the ball. They dropped the ball in Texas. That individual, I will not say his name, should not have had a firearm. They dropped the ball in Florida. They dropped the ball over and over again. and they expect me to give up my only means to defend myself, under the false pretense that they will keep me safe. After a failure of the magnitude that we saw in Florida, the logic doesn't add up. And it's not something that I think Rhode Islanders should stand for, and that's all.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions or comments for this witness? Thank you. The next group of witnesses we have are Daniel Ouimet, Patrick Ford, Francisco Gonzalez. Douglas Moorcroft. Oh, I'm sorry. All three of them are here, but you'll be next. I apologize. Sir, we'll start with you on our right, your left. Good morning. Thank you for your patience.
Good morning. Is this on? I've heard a lot. Obviously, we've all heard a lot tonight. For what I've wanted to say, we've all pretty much heard it, from statistics to history to stories. I first want to say that us people who fully believe in the constitutional rights that we hold dear, we still sympathize with those who have lost loved ones across the country. I think we believe on a wide variety of issues as far as trying to end or cure the mental health issue. I believe that we can all come to an agreement that we don't want to see anybody killed. But we have to come at this with some common sense and some humility at the same time. One of the biggest issues that has been pretty much subdued is our cultural issue. I mean, I've heard everything put on blame, to guns, to drugs, which do have an issue. But the people don't really want to hear the truth. The truth of the matter is accountability is lost. Issues start at home with parenting. I mean, I can give you the statistics that marital status is widely broken. Kids are lost today. They don't have any direction. They're not taught right in school. They're not taught right at home for the majority of the part. We have a cultural issue. These kids, for the most part, are just not raised right today in society. They are influenced many ways. In music, in art now, you see it, the Golden Globes awards show, whatever that monstrosity was. You see it all over. Drugs do have an effect, but if we're gonna put blame on tools, I mean, you might as well just put blame on vehicles, as they account to thousands and thousands of deaths a year. Now, vehicular homicides, you don't blame the Chevy, you don't blame the Ford. Blame the person behind the wheel. Car is just a tool to get around, tool to travel, whatever, tool to customize. But you blame the driver. Insurance blames the driver. What's the difference with a gun? I just don't see it. I think we get away from accountability and you know, just common sense altogether. Another big issue is representation. A poll was given. Nearly 80% of people in this poll said that more gun laws enacted will not help anything. The poll was taken down, and the gentleman who represents District 1 still signed the bill and decided to try and push it through. That is not listening or caring the people that you represent. That is a misrepresentation. That is a lack of representation. And I bring the argument towards Mr. Metz. Senator, it is imperative. We elect you, which means we put some trust in you to listen to us. And the ignorance is if you're going to try and push through a bill that 80% of people saying that it's no good, that is not listening to it. That is absolutely not listening to us. That's not caring of what we have to say.
Senator Matt.
Yeah, if I can, I don't think you know my district. My district is majority minority. We had a family where the father shot all the kids, and they heard the little boy begging his father for his life, and then the father took his life because what he wanted to do was to make the mother and his wife feel the pain. So my wife was the head of the guidance department at Roger Williams Middle School, and some of the kids went to other schools. It not only directly impacted that family, it impacted all the schools where those kids went. I've been to more funerals of teenagers than you'll ever go to. So before you judge me, my constituents are very happy that I put that bill in. That's why I get 98% of the vote, just so you know. So your district is different than my district. So as far as representing my community or my constituents, that's exactly what I'm doing. So I just wanted to correct you on that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. So you can continue.
Is the principle of the matter, not just what district you represent. Us, I don't feel like I don't feel like I have to. I don't feel like I have to. We as a people employ you. We hire you. We instill trust in you to a certain degree. And again, you saying that you don't want to listen to a man who is given a testimony because you don't agree with his stance. That's ignorance in itself. Now, we can agree on issues.
I
It's
never
fine.
said that. I never said that. I said I'm here to listen to everybody. I've been doing it for 28 years.
But not listen to this gentleman who was giving a testimony.
Point of order,
Sir,
Madam
can
Chair.
just, Senator Lombardi.
Point of order. We got to focus testimony on the issue, on the bills before us, not personalities or otherwise. And I would urge the witnesses just to testify through the chair and not direct anything to any individual senators.
Thank you, Senator.
Absolutely.
Sir,
And
please continue.
I fully agree. What I'm trying to make in his example as far as representation, which is a problem that we also have when bills are being put forth to the general public. I do not support anything that goes against the U.S. Constitution. I do, however, support reciprocity, constitutional reciprocity. I don't understand why that's not implemented. As a United States citizen, I should be able to take my weapons with me for the sake of safety into neighboring states. Many other states recognize that. I believe that's a necessity. As far as the bill that goes for teachers that allow to carry, I think that's been misconstrued a lot as far as all teachers being able to carry. I think we can all agree that there's some teachers that probably should not carry. So we have to be very diligent on how we go about that. But I stand with many of the people behind me that we want our students to be safe. We also have to do a better job on parenting and not teaching our kids to be so dependent on government and so dependent on safe spaces. These are kids just a few weeks ago, a month ago, company had to come out and pretty much design its own safety box so kids could not access a non-edible substance. And yet you guys are weighing on their trust to help decide bills. That's, to me, is definitely wrong. These kids perfectly well knew what they were consuming. They perfectly well knew the dangers and the issues that these chemicals cause. It is an issue.
Sir, if we could just stick to the pieces of legislation that are before us, please.
I'm all for the United States Constitution, and we elect you guys to enforce it and protect it, and that's what I stand for.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments for this witness? Thank you. Sir, good morning. Welcome.
Hey, good morning. My name is Pat Ford. I'm chairman of the Rhode Island Libertarian Party. Just a quick editorialization, and I too have condensed my notes significantly. An earlier gentleman, I believe 2 gentlemen ago, pointed out the politicization of the tragedy and that took place just a week ago in Florida. I too am disgusted by that. The governor of the state of Rhode Island issued via internet on the Facebook, if you will, a simplistic one-page question about gun violence, followed up by a quick request for campaign contributions. That, in conjunction with the embarrassment that was the executive order that took place the next day, is, regardless of your stance on this issue, an affront to both the state and federal constitution, and really, I think, put the Rhode Island State Police in a very tenuous position and clearly had no regard for civil liberties. Briefly, again, my name is Pat Ford. I am chairman of the Rhode Island Libertarian Party. As I always say, haven't heard of us? You will. Over 15,000 Rhode Islanders voted for our presidential candidate, Gary Johnson, in the 2016 presidential election. I am a voluntarist. I voluntarily submit to be governed. I consent. I reserve the right to withdraw at any time. The right to bear arms, to defend oneself, transcends any written constitution, federal or state. It is a right ultimately we are born with. It is absolute, with a line drawn only at aggression, not possession. Legally, the federal Constitution and the Rhode Island Constitution is equally absolute. The text of the Constitution expressly guarantees the right to bear arms, not just to right to keep them. Many in this chamber successfully, and I rather say heroically, defend the First Amendment, quite religiously. I would say at this point in time that they perhaps should spend equal amount of time both reading, appreciating the history of, and defending the Second Amendment, as the Fourth, as the Ninth. It is the time that the Second Amendment be taken just as seriously. As a defensive force, the government and law enforcement of this nation has failed egregiously despite extensive legislation, very often feel-good legislation, guarded sometimes or cloaked in the cloak of humanity, or sometimes in the cloak of the American flag. People have previously mentioned Texas, Florida. I'll add the Zarnaev brothers just up the road in Boston a few years ago. 9/11 itself. The government routinely creates legislation, it creates power, it spends money, and routinely fails egregiously, despite clear connections to really support the law that it so aggressively pursues. It was just a few short years ago, and let me mention again the elephant in the room, the reason why we need a well-regulated militia. The federal government just a few years ago in this nation interned thousands of American citizens and took their property because of their race being Japanese. A first world nation just a few short weeks ago, Spain, with whom we are a NATO partner, fired upon peaceful civilians, the Catalans, simply because they wished to pursue a local election. Fired upon them. The citizenry has the right to maintain this well-ordered militia because of a track record across this world, within immediate memory, of the type of oppression around the world that the citizens, frankly, weren't armed to fight. We focused briefly on the red flag legislation. Constitutionally, this is an abomination. I routinely support, by the way, the work of the American Civil Liberties Union, particularly here in Rhode Island. I have found their adherence to constitutional principles to be quite remarkable. This legislation, as written, I'm referring directly to and I want to enter into the record, A person could be subject to an extreme risk protective order without ever having committed or even having threatened to commit an act of violence with a firearm. While aimed at responding to red flags, this bill sets a low threshold for judicial intervention, particularly when one compares it to the myriad and blatant red flag warnings that the Parkland shooter left but that were ignored by law enforcement agencies. And contrary to popular belief, the bill is not limited to addressing people who pose an immediate threat of harm. In short, there is a great disparity between whom the bill actually affects and the high-profile shooting incidents that made passage of this legislation seem so pressing. The court order authored by this legislation could be issued without any indication that the person poses an imminent threat to others. The order could be issued without any evidence that the person ever committed or has even threatened to commit an act of violence with a firearm, for whom I might add, laws already exist for prosecution. The court order would require the confiscation for at least a year of any firearms lawfully owned by the person and place the burden on him or her to prove by clear and convincing evidence that they should be returned after that time. If denied, the person would have to wait another year to petition for return of his or her property. Throughout this state's recent history, we have had to constantly litigate for the return of property by an overreaching police department. Especially egregious, the person could be subjected to a coerced mental health evaluation, and the court decision on that and all these other matters would be made at a hearing where the person would not be entitled to appointed counsel. My addition, when used in conjunction with this body's recent decision to allow warrantless searches of the prescription medical database, you have a clear abrogation of your fundamental responsibility as a state to protect civil liberties and a clear abrogation of these people's ability to enjoin against the government, clearly on 10, for potentially, in the future, egregious political speech. With the issuance of an order, police would have had broad authority to search the person's property. Yeah, there's that tricky Fourth Amendment there again. Gotta hate that. The standard for seeking and issuing an order is so broad that it would routinely be used against people who engage in, air quotes, overblown political rhetoric on social media or against alleged gang members when police want to find a shortcut to seize lawfully owned weapons from them. I would argue that this body in particular has been very aggressive in shall we say, supporting legislation at the city of Providence level against organizations like the Jump Out Boys from the Providence Police Department. We rightfully saw in situations where stop and frisk or aggressive use of law enforcement against the war on drugs was seen as an abrogation of individual civil rights, where people were classified by their race or ethnic background. We saw that then, and yet we as a legislative body, as a state, would endorse this atrocity? Absolutely not. It's time to reel it back. As terrible, and like most of the people who testified in this room, I have children in school age. As terrible as the tragedy of Parkland was, as terrible as the tragedy of Houston, let's not forget Fort Hood, the ultimate, irony, a gun-free zone in a military installation. The atrocities in California. The fact that we are a violent society is not an issue to be dismissed easily, but there are certainly other issues supporting the causal relationship between family structure, between economic violence, between a number of reasons that have caused this type of violence in our society. However, disarming a populace and leaving them, if you will, prone or subject to the whims of law enforcement in order to protect them for a daily basis is not only wrong, it is expressly forbidden in both the Rhode Island State Constitution as well as our federal Constitution. To that I say, to hell with this bill, throw it out. It is not worth the paper it was written on, and it's time, quite frankly, to stop this emotional cascade, if you will, against individual civil rights and just start all over from fresh. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for this witness? Thank you. Sir, good morning and welcome.
Thanks a lot. I know it's late. First of all, I've met a lot.
We're past late and on to early.
Past late,
Thanks.
yeah. I've met a lot of great people on the yellow shirt side that I know I could absolutely trust with my life, and I would feel much safer with them around than with just about anybody else. However, I think that's really not the point. As I said, my name is Francisco Gonzalez. I'm from Providence. I am an American citizen. I come from a military family. Both my father and my brother are highly decorated veterans. I do suicide prevention work locally, often posting signs here and there. identifying 911 and 211 as easily available resources. Our society is in trouble due to a variety of reasons. We cannot sit passively and let tragedy run its course. The airline industry and the automobile industry are constantly improving their safety itineraries, so we must improve the way guns serve a common purpose. Give me a second, I don't want to get lost. Oh boy. Yes, suicide is often an impulsive act which also requires availability. Massachusetts enacted laws to put fences on dangerous bridges. The barriers have saved lives because despite the common urban myth that suicidal individuals often excuse me, I lost my track here. These suicidal individuals often get help after their first suicide attempt fails, but not always, of course, but often enough to enact effective laws to outfit bridges with tall fences. Guns, from my perspective as a crisis interventionist, are dangerous for deeply depressed people. And all of us here should take notice and keep an eye on each other. I have personally experienced severe depression and know very well my vulnerability. If alone, depression can happen to anyone, so be extremely careful. Not about your guns per se, but about your personal limits. And my wife will tell you how she had to wrestle me to get pills out of my mouth, and how I struggle with myself putting a pipe from my car and try to kill myself with gas. So I don't. So I think it's important that we look at that. These people are rational people, good people, but I think we're really here about risk, aren't we? And I think that's really what it's about. And thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments for this witness? Thank you very much. The next group of witnesses we have are Douglas Moorcroft, David Eichelman. Good job. Oh, thank you. I was iffy on that one. And Ronald Andruko. Sir, we'll start with you. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. Good morning, Senators. I'm Doug Moorcroft from South Kingstown, Rhode Island. I'm a firearms safety instructor, a war veteran, or a range safety officer. I was a Boy Scout shooting sports director. I grew up on a farm. I've had a pistol permit in many states since I was 18. I was an armed security guard when I was young, before I became active duty military. I understand firearms. I understand the need to reduce firearm violence. I would like to address the real issues and not infringe on our constitutional rights. I will quickly cover a lot of the topics that were already mentioned, but I have several concerns I don't believe have been mentioned yet. One overall comment is these bills inspire many citizens to purchase many more firearms every year. My overall recommendation is to stop hearing bills each year that clearly cross the line on constitutional rights and would never pass court muster, in my opinion. Bills like these are just driving folks to purchase firearms. The first bill, I do support Senate Bill 2134, which would require the AG to do a report each year. I also support Senate Bill 2148, which would basically recognize out-of-state permits. All the other bills I oppose. Getting back to 2148, it requires an incredible amount of time and expense for citizens to get pistol permits in multiple states. It is unacceptable. It is time for all states to recognize permits in other states. I understand we need to have some kind of limits on testing and at least a benchmark for issuing permits, but we need to start recognizing out-of-state permits in all states. For Senate Bill 2274, this is a bill, basically they want to outlaw rifles and shotguns being transported unless you're going to a range. Is outrageous. And I can't believe that anyone would even propose such a bill. It clearly would not pass a court review with anyone who was impartial. This would prevent me from bringing a rifle or shotgun to a woodlot I own in Connecticut. Is so across the line, I just can't believe we're wasting our time discussing this bill. Please oppose Senate Bill 2274. For Senate Bill 2289, this bill will clearly increase the body count if there ever is a school shooting in Rhode Island, or it will have no effect. It will not reduce any kind of violence in schools. There's something like 4,000 concealed carry permit holders in Rhode Island. They're, for the most part, are doing their best, and they're the top of the sportsmen in Rhode Island. It's not easy to get. The Attorney General plays a lot of politics with issuing permits, and there's a lot of hoops to run through, and I just can't believe they're going after concealed carry permit holders. This would prevent many parents from bringing their kids to school. That is just outrageous. So you can't drive onto the school property and drop off your kids if you have a CCW and you're armed. And I also would like to cover Bill 2319. Basically, this is attempting to limit magazine capacity to 10 rounds. This is also outrageous. I own an antique rifle, and the only magazine ever made for it is a 20-round magazine. So basically, it's going to make my gun obsolete because you can't shoot it without a magazine effectively. And also, in case you haven't, this is one thing I haven't heard tonight yet. A lot of people don't realize when you reduce magazine capacity, if you do the math, what do you think people are going to do? They're going to get a larger caliber. That larger calibers are usually more deadly than the smaller calibers. So if you do pass the magazine ban, the vast majority of folks are going to go to larger capacity, larger caliber weapons that only hold 10 rounds. And I personally think that's the wrong way to go. And it is correct that it takes a couple seconds to exchange a magazine, but there's been many, it's not that difficult to carry around a few extra magazines. Senate Bill 2455, I also oppose. This would, the Attorney General already plays politics issuing pistol permits. This would change Rhode Island from a shall issue for police chief issue permits to a may issue only for the Attorney General permits. And there's already too many politics in Rhode Island concerning pistol permits, and that is unacceptable. And I will probably be one of the folks fighting that in court to overturn it if anyone's foolish enough to pass that one. Senate Bill 2492, I oppose. This is a perfect bill to disarm someone if they want to, if they have an issue with someone, they want to attack them, or they just want revenge, to basically, with no proof whatsoever, you can take away someone's firearms. This also would greatly discourage firearm owners from seeking any kind of counseling. I think that's the last thing we want to do. If someone thinks they need counseling, I want them to go get it and not to be discouraged by a bill like this. And many gun owners I'm aware of have already stored firearms outside the state, and this is only going to greatly increase that tendency if they pass a bill like this. and there's no procedure for transportation, storage, or what's going to happen to the firearms in the bill. There's no evidence required to show that the person is an immediate threat to themselves or others. And the burden of proof is on the accused. It's just crosses the line. This is a pre-crime bill, which would make our founding fathers just roll around their graves if they were aware of something like this happening. I also oppose Senate Bill 2493. The Second Amendment clearly protects common semi-automatic firearms. Many of them are the most common firearms owned, and you're trying to outlaw them. I would be shocked if that would not be overturned by the courts. And I also would, one other thing I haven't really heard very much of tonight is basically a lot of the numbers that we discuss, where a lot of these folks like to mention that the U.S. has a higher murder count than other countries. I totally disagree. The reason for that is they're only counting murders done by the own citizens of the country. What we really have to do is add up the murders done by the governments and the citizens. And if you look at the statistics from the 20th century, from 1900 to 2000, the many different studies are available out there, and they all kind of vary. But by and large, they're huge numbers. One study was 262 million people were killed by governments in the 100-year period. And that's just a huge number of people compared to the small number of Americans killed by other citizens with firearms. So I would ask, when you're comparing how many Americans are killed by firearms, to look at the big picture. How many citizens are also killed by their governments? And we are much safer in the U.S. compared to other countries, if you look at the big picture. And I guess I'm going to stop there for now.
Thank you for your testimony, sir. Are there any questions or comments for this witness? Thank you. Sir, good morning. Thank you for your patience.
Good morning. I'm going to endeavor to keep this as brief as possible. So I'm going to mainly read from my notes here. My name is David Eichelman. I'm the husband of an active duty service member stationed in Newport, and the father of a beautiful 6-year-old girl who is in kindergarten at Pell Elementary. Before living here, my family and I lived in the Norfolk, Virginia area for 3 years, and I'd like to tell you about meeting my wife for dinner. To get aboard ship when she had duty, which was about once a week, I had to show an 18 to 21-year-old sailor who was carrying a gun an ID. To get onto my wife's pier, I had to show ID to 2 gate sentries who were also 21-year-olds armed with M16s in order to get to the quarterdeck of her warship. There, I, for a third time, had to show an ID to a pair of 18 to 21-year-olds, again, armed with M16s, and generally to a junior officer who was usually 23 years old, armed with a handgun. The solution to security for our military is to stand men and women with guns in front of things it values to protect them from harm. This is not uncommon practice. The president of this country is protected with guns. The governor of this state is protected with guns. Our airports are protected with guns. Our banks are protected with guns. This building, through the diligence of our state police, is protected with guns. Our kids are protected by a gun-free zone sign. I find it odd that we don't prevent fires in our schools with fire-free zone signs of fire extinguishers. We don't protect our kids with injury-free zone signs, but with first aid kits. We do this because even though we have professional firefighters and professional EMTs, an adequate amateur response immediately rendered is better than a professional response 10 minutes later. I don't come from a gun background. My parents didn't own guns. I didn't own a gun until July of 2013. My first gun was an AR-15 that I purchased here in Rhode Island as soon as able after moving here from Germany. My wife and I own 7 rifles, 2 of which are AR-15s that we keep at hand in our bedroom. We have AR-15s for the defense of our home because it is the most effective firearm for that purpose. I don't own an AR-15 to hunt, nor is hunting the purpose of the Second Amendment. We have been given the Second Amendment as a bulwark against tyranny, both the large tyranny of a government turned against the people and the small tyranny of a criminal bent on inflicting grievous harm. We've heard from teenagers terrified by the experience of lockdown drills. We've heard incident reports from Sandy Hook and Parkland of educators throwing themselves in front of gunfire. None of these bills we've heard tonight will stop that from happening. None of these bills will stop the next Virginia Tech, the next Sandy Hook, or the next Parkland, because the people you'll be taking guns away from will be law-abiding fathers, mothers, daughters, and sons, like the hundreds of citizens you've seen here tonight wearing yellow. Putting a video of the next attempted mass shooter taking a rifle round to the face, however, will. Please cease wasting time attempting to strip the rights of law-abiding citizens and start taking measures to harden our schools and protect our kids. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for this witness? Thank you. Sir, good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Chair Prada, Vice Chair Archambault, Secretary Metz, distinguished members of the Senate Judiciary, and Senator Jabor, my own district senator. My name is Jeff Hrostowski, and I'm a resident of Providence, Rhode Island's West End, a touring musician with the Low Anthem, and a member of the team that revitalized the Columbus Theater. In the preamble to our Constitution, before the Second Amendment, it says, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States of America." And one of the key ideas in establishing our Constitution, based in the very words of the preamble itself, ordered third only after forming a more perfect union and establishing justice, was to ensure domestic tranquility. That is the purpose of our amendments, including the second one, to ensure this domestic tranquility. What is tranquility? Is it not quiet, peace, calm, serenity without violence? Like the tranquility you might find at the shore of a quiet lake at sunset or inside a beautiful cathedral. Are we ensuring domestic tranquility by having guns allowed in K-12 schools, around children in places of learning, even after Parkland? Are we ensuring domestic tranquility by allowing high-capacity magazines in our home self-defense firearms, even after the massacre at Parkland? Are we ensuring domestic tranquility by allowing AR-15 type semi-automatic assault rifles in our homes and in our communities, even after the horrors of Parkland? I ask you, let us honor the victims of gun violence today in Parkland, but also in Sandy Hook, Orlando, Las Vegas, Charleston, Columbine, Aurora, Virginia Tech, and all the everyday incidents of gun violence that have become normal. These uniquely American tragedies of our time, this senseless and obscene gun violence, these American children whose dreams are now gone, whose parents have to live day in, day out with the loss of their kids, with the loss of all that potential, the loss of their world. Let us honor these families and their suffering through concrete action by bravely passing these common sense gun law reforms? How many more before we act? As our founding fathers wrote in the preamble to our Constitution, before the Second Amendment, as it is my individual right, my liberty, and my freedom as a citizen to demand this of my leaders, that we need to ensure domestic tranquility in our nation, in our state, and in our community. We have not ensured domestic tranquility. We have to stop pointing these guns at each other in schools, in movie theaters, in churches, at music concerts. We must act, and that's why I'm here alongside all these brave high school students to support the assault weapons ban, the Safe Schools Act, and the high capacity magazine ban. Please act with your conscience and bring them to a floor vote. Thank you. I yield the floor and submit my testimony for the record.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments for this witness? Thank you. I only have one witness left signed up to testify, Mike Vellucci. Is there anyone else, ma'am, if you want to come forward as well? Ma'am, did you also want to testify? Okay. So you two are it for the night, so, or you, ma'am, I think are it. Good morning and welcome, ma'am. You can proceed.
My name is Letitia Davis. I'm a resident of Exeter, and I've testified a number of times to this committee over the many years, and I appreciate your tolerance in staying up late and letting me go ahead even though I'm the last one. I will not repeat what so many others have said, but I will merely state that I support Bill number 2134, 2148, and I oppose all of the others. And there's just a couple of, well, several things that I wanted to bring up that I haven't heard, and maybe that's because I was in the other hearing. Which incidentally, why on earth would the two hearings in the House Judiciary and this be scheduled at the same time? Because, you know, that must have been where I was earlier. It was, yeah, so. So one of the things that I wanted to bring up, as I have testified in the past, I'm able to be here because my life was saved by a gun. So to me, a gun for self-defense is a very real thing. And I've heard testimony listening tonight about the costs of the health care for shooting victims, you know, and what a high value and cost to our society is. But what is the value of the people whose lives are saved? To me, that's a pretty high value that I'm still here, and I'm only here because of a gun. And so I think that most of the testimony I heard tonight was only looking at all the costs of guns, but it wasn't looking at the benefit side of it, and they are a benefit to society. Now, I took a home defense course, and the policeman who taught the course said an AR-15 was the most effective firearm for home defense, and I intend to get one of these days. I haven't done it yet. When we talk about, I guess, the red flag bills and talk about the issue of basically taking the guns away and the due process comes later. I feel like we did that last year with the domestic violence bill. And I think due process is something like pregnancy. You can't be a little bit pregnant and you can't have a little bit of due process. You either have it or you don't. And once we start down that slippery slope, who decides whether it's important enough to just ignore the Constitution and ignore due process? Who decides? The other issue is who decides who's mentally ill? In mainstream media, I've heard recently that if you pray and you listen to God and you talk to God, that you're probably mentally ill. Well, in the old Soviet Union, what did they do with people they disagreed with? They called them mentally ill and they locked them up. So, you know, that's something I remember growing up. I also remember being told to get under my desk in case of a nuclear attack. I don't know what the lockdown procedure is at the schools, but to me, the visual, I didn't see it, of course, but the description of, either a principal at Sandy Hook or a teacher and coach in the Florida shooting, having the only way to protect the students by using their body to block and give their life. To me, it's absolutely criminal that we set up a situation where they cannot defend themselves. It's just absolutely beyond me. So the only other issue I will bring up is on the background checks. As you all know, Exeter is the only town without a police department, and we do have to go through the FBI background checks. And the whole background check issue has been, much under discussion lately because people seem to have been able to get guns when they shouldn't have. Well, some states aren't reporting into the database. Some military is not reporting into the database. Government institutions aren't reporting into the database. So if the background check database for all the instant checks isn't being populated by the whole country, it's not going to be accurate, and it's not going to pick up people who might have been caught, like I guess the guy in the Air Force. The Air Force had neglected to pass that information along. The other issue is the timeliness of it. It took me 3.5 months for an FBI check this summer to renew my CCW. And something, when you have that long of a delay, it's effectively a denial for that period of time. So if we're going to do something with background checks, there needs to be a requirement that it be done in a timely manner and not just be completely at the mercy of an institution that doesn't seem to care one single bit about how long it takes or how long you're waiting for it. And, well, I think that pretty much hits it. So thank you very much for letting me slip in there at the end.
Of course, no problem, and thank you for waiting. And again, thank everyone here for being so patient and sticking it out to the end. Senator Archambault moves that we vote those bills contained on tonight's agenda in a block, seconded by Senator Jabour. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, we're going to vote on the bills in the block. Senator Archambault moves to hold for further study, seconded by Senator Jabour. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, the bills are held. Senator Coyne moves to adjourn for the day. I'm losing my words already, so I apologize. Seconded by Senator Raptakis. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, we're adjourned.